Richard Saren's Strange Planet. Following the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
Welcome, friends. Welcome to the program. I spent my day closing the pool. Although it's not a big pool, it's a wading pool. It still took most of the day to drain that puppy and get ready for the fall. Man, things up here in southwestern Ontario, it just turned on a dime. Like one day it was balmy and hot, and we were contemplating one last run to the beach, and then the next day, bam, like an iron curtain. You can feel fall in the air, right? Okay, listen, I spent some time out in Los Angeles and surrounding environs a couple of weeks ago, and I met some real interesting individuals. I haven't done a lot of shows on Sasquatch, but after meeting my next two guests, I thought it is high time, because these two guys are credible, they're knowledgeable, and you really need to hear what they have to say. We're busy trying to raise one of these gentlemen on the phone right now, but I've got Tom Muzila with us, so I'll just bring him in right now. Tom's a veteran film and television actor. You've probably you'd recognize his face if you saw him in the movies. I know. He's also a former Green Beret and Vietnam War veteran, a martial artist, bodyguard to the stars, and likes to spend his spare time with his good buddy Peter Guttilla tracking Bigfoot. Tom, welcome to the Conspiracy Show. How are you?
Okay, great. Thank you for inviting me on the show. Appreciate it.
And thank you for inviting me and my film crew into your home a couple of weeks back. It was great meeting you in person.
Oh, it was great, Richard. Yeah, pleasure. Thank you for coming.
Let me also get the aforementioned Peter Guttilla in here. He refers to him. I love this title. He refers to himself as an enigmatologist. He's a veteran Bigfoot field researcher, founder of the Western Society for Exploration of the Unexplained. He's also a freelance writer, an author of several books, including this gem I've got in my hands right now. It's called The Bigfoot Files. Peter, welcome to the Conspiracy Show.
I'm your huckleberry, you know.
It was great meeting you, and thank you for welcoming
you're
us.
You're a little fuzzy on my phone here. I don't know if that's
I'm like
technical.
I'm like the Bigfoot photos. I guess I'm always fuzzy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You know, I'm you're a little fuzzy on your end. A little hard to hear you.
Oh, okay. I was just saying, maybe I'm like all the Bigfoot photos. I'm always a little fuzzy.
Yeah, we'll join the crowd. I mean, that's probably why we're talking to each other.
There you go. Peter and Tom, either of you jump in here at any moment, but how did you two get together and start tracking Bigfoot together?
Well, I'll head that one off. When I was in college, there was a professor, Richard Spurney, who was a theologist, and this was back in the early 70s when a lot of people thought ESP and psychic abilities were more associated with just the occult, and certain people were just gifted with that. But he was a unique individual and really understood that we all have this innate ability, and we can just practice it and enhance it like we could anything else. So he put together these 5-person teams through a couple of years, and we experimented doing readings for doctors, psychologists, missing person, police department, all different kinds of things. And then Peter heard about the work that Richard Spurney was doing, and even though he was well-trained in intuition, ESP, they both connected, and Peter tried to actually integrate it using groups, sensitive groups, to find out some insight to Bigfoot and UFOs. And I was always loved the outdoors and mountain climbing and everything, and I thought this would be a great challenge and make it interesting.
And Peter, how did you get connected with Tom? I mean, I know it's the same story,
but it kind of dropped out of the sky on my head. Actually, basically that's the story. I mean, Tom turned out to be one of the best psychics I've ever known, and I've known a lot of them, over the years. And we got together and started talking about these things. And he was fascinated by my work, which had preceded my contact with Professor Spurney by about 10 or 12 years. And so we joined forces. I mean, I said, listen, man, Tom could find literally a needle in a haystack. But we go back a long way, and it's the kind of thing that just sort of grows on you, you know.
I guess what I was asking...
Listen, let's try to track unknown or unusual phenomena. And Tom went along with it, and so we've been together ever since.
I guess what I was getting at, Peter, was what led you to believe that a psychic would come in handy in tracking Bigfoot? What was the connection there?
Well, that's the $64 question. Keep in mind, I had been involved in these things for a long time up to that point. And it's all very elusive. Sasquatches are very elusive. And I had already bruised my shins on, rocks and rills in every major mountain range in the western U.S. by that time. And I knew there was something in the equation that was missing. The hunters were after Bigfoot, the aficionados and other enthusiasts, and they were trying every technique known to man. I knew one guy that was carrying a big packet of tranquilizers. They'd follow the foot tracks, and they'd go to the sighting locations, and virtually every time these wonderful creatures would leave them in the lurch. So I got fed up with it, and I said, listen, let's try using psychics to see if we can't do what we've done with ordinary things. Now, Tom and I, over the years, we found missing persons, not always in happy circumstances. We found missing animals. We knew we could do it. Okay, so let's assume for a moment that Bigfoot was missing. Okay. And so we got together and started working on techniques that would be exclusive to locating these creatures.
But also, there's another connection here, Peter and Tom, and that is a number of individuals that have had up-close encounters with Sasquatch ascribe a certain psychic ability to these creatures. Explain.
Right. Oh, no question about it. I mean, but again, this is a matter of experience. You need to go into the field, and you need to be in those circumstances. And you need to have that sort of hands-on kind of thing before you realize some of this. But Tom and I were aware of it a long time ago, as Tom will attest, I'm sure, that these creatures are able to literally outmaneuver just about any tracker under any circumstances. I mean, up to this day, keep in mind, no bone, no billet, no burial plot, nothing. But they're there. We know that, and I'm sure Tom will agree with me. We both know they're real. But what they are, we're still not quite sure of.
Tom, when you've been out tracking Bigfoot with Peter, and you've felt their presence, I mean, as someone with a psychic ability, what are you sensing? Are you getting telepathic messages? What do you sense when these creatures are around?
Well, where I attribute it to, like I practiced and taught karate and martial arts for 45 years, and you get a sense of your opponent. You look in your opponent's eyes, and you sense their subconscious mind, and the eyes of the lamps of the soul. And then, if you take it farther, as far as being ambushed by ninjas or something, the samurai and warriors in martial arts, you get a sense if there's somebody around that corner. You get a feeling of presence just with a human being. Or, I used to teach a number of women's self-defense classes. You always want to assume that there's an opponent there or an attacker or robber around this corner when you open this door and get a sense and use your intuition. So it's very similar to that, to network that over at a bigger level. I mean, there's been so many people that have been not just out in the woods, but they felt like somebody was watching them, and the hair on the back of their neck would stand up. They just get this tingly type feeling, and there's something watching. It could have been a bear, it could have been a deer, a wolf, or a mountain lion, or whatever. But this has been happening a majority of time with creatures after there's been a sighting. They got a sense of something was watching them first, and then they got a glimpse of it at some point. So with myself, you feel that presence. It's just like a energy or a sense or feeling, a presence that there's something there. And then, of course, you can feel whether it's negative, positive, aggressive, or passive. You know, that kind of articulates a little bit more if you can break it down.
And how do you break it down, Tom? When you've been in close proximity, and we'll discuss some of yours and Peter's encounters as the hour progresses, but when you're in close proximity, what kind of vibe are you getting from these creatures?
Well, you know, I wouldn't say it's not negative at all, but the most important thing is so darn powerful, the presence. If you could imagine maybe 100 foot away, there's an elephant there, and the aura energy field, the magnetic field of the elephant, I mean, this thing would be like, 10 times more than that. Just like not just a physically awesome creature, but their magnetic field and aura and presence is so powerful and almost takes command of the whole area, just being there, and not aggressive at all, you know, because they're very passive and very curious, and they just kind of come in and out and take off very quick.
Peter,
let me interject
yes,
there
yes.
just a minute. He is not understating this. I mean, it's so obvious to us and to the people that I've worked with exclusively over the years that it defies comment. I mean, the presence is there, and you can sense it. Tom and I were probably within 20 feet of one in Washington in the early 80s, and Tom will agree with me, that creature just literally, I mean, pressed on the ground. I mean, you could feel it. It was there. I stood about 20 feet from it. Tom was on guarding my flank, if you will, and I was taken aback. I was bristling with equipment. I had my tape recorder, my camera, everything else, my flashlight. I was ready to go. I was going to plunge into the unknown, and I just stood there like a moron while this creature literally took the whole spot over, and then it shot away from me almost in a cartoonish kind of way. It was so fast, it was hard to grasp what had happened, and it went right past Tom with the same speed. But he was in the woods, and it literally crackled and chomped through the woods, sounding clumsy in a way, but it was not. It moved so fast I don't know that any method of preparation would have worked at that time.
Now, I want to get into some of the encounters when we come back. Let me just remind listeners that Tom Muzila, Peter Guttilla are on the line, two veteran Bigfoot trackers, and you will not believe what they are about to relate. Stay with us here on The Conspiracy Show as we discuss the psychic Sasquatch.
The truth will set you free. But first, it will really tick you off. Welcome back to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Peter Guttilla is with us, an enigmatologist. I love that, Peter. What is an enigmatologist?
Yeah, well, I've been trying to figure that out for years. I mean, it's really just someone who is an aficionado, an enthusiast, who goes after the unexplained. And I've been doing it for many years. I'm basically a journalist, so I went at it as an investigator, if you will, and it includes all aspects of the unknown. Flying saucers, UFOs, ghosties and ghoulies, other things that go bump in the night and that sort of thing. I've become well known as a Bigfooter because I wrote a book about it and because I was deeply interested in it from almost the beginning, and I've spent a lot of time doing it, but I've also spent a lot of time looking at other things as well.
Tom Muzila is, as I say, a veteran film and television actor. If you've seen Steven Seagal's action pictures, you've probably spied Tom in those movies. And as I say, former Vietnam War veteran, martial artist, bodyguard to the stars. Now, let's talk about one of your encounters. Peter, you mentioned that at one point you were about 20 feet away. Tell us, was this in Washington State?
Yeah, that was a very interesting situation. Well, Tom and I did a lot of exploring, and we were all over the country at one time, and in Washington State, at a place called Snohomish, we spent, I don't know, what was it, Tom? I think about 4 weeks, something akin to that in the 80s, looking into the sightings and other reports in that area. and there was what was called the Snohomish Screamer. And I was fascinated by that because I had collected audio evidence of these creatures for a long time prior to that. And someone contacted me, a journalist up there contacted me and said, we got something running around out here that's screaming and terrifying the locals and frightening livestock and all of that. So I was up there at a flash, And so Tom and I were there, and we heard the screamer. Oh, there's been a lot of flack about it over the years because I've shared my data with media and so on, and some researchers have given opinions that it was a screech owl or coyote and all that. That's just abject nonsense, And this creature would scream. It would sound almost like a woman screaming, if you will. No gender offense intended.
But extremely powerful, yeah.
And we went up there, and we heard it, and we went after it, often in the pitch of night. Tom even managed to get arrested. I love this guy. He will go where no man will go about anything.
Well, if you're going to go stomping around in the woods, having a former Green Beret is a good guy to have with you.
Oh, absolutely. And Tom is everything he purports to be. I can attest to that, believe me. And he was a good man to have with me, and I knew it. He was a mountaineer. He was a paratrooper and feared nothing. And that's what I wanted with me, because there is nothing to fear, really. But, you're in the dark, you're in the woods, you're in faraway places, very remote, and you have to have a certain courage to do that.
I'll say, yeah.
And, there he was, and there we were, and this creature came trudging down one of the trails, and it was close to us. I was in an alcove, hunkered down, waiting, and this baby was coming along, screaming its lungs out, very close.
Did you get a good visual?
Tom was on my flank.
Did you get a good visual?
To my left, where we had pre-planned for him to be, and this creature was getting closer and closer and closer. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I didn't want to use any lights or make any noise, so I waited. It got closer and then stopped. Well, at that point, my wits left me, and I dashed into the trail, went around a turn, and all I can tell you, I was blithered. I mean, I had no idea because there was a black shape in front of me. Keep in mind, it's pitch black. I was bristling with stuff. I had all my equipment with me, but I didn't count on being that close to something that with that kind of essence. I mean, Tom is absolutely right. It generates a kind of force field, if you will.
So what are you? You're paralyzed? You're paralyzed not with fear, but you're just what?
Yeah, I mean, well, it wasn't fear. It was a bizarre kind of stunned paralysis. It might have been partly my doing because I had no idea it was that close. And all I can tell you is the feeling was that I was standing next to a mountain. I mean, suddenly it was free flowing. There, the whole area was airy and open and free flowing, and suddenly there was this block. That's the only way I can describe it. Yeah. I looked forward. I could see a black shadow. It was humanoid in shape, very big, over 9 feet. And it was sort of like, oh, Mr. Ed. And I had to stop, and I just stopped. And the minute I did that, within seconds, it kind of leapt or jerked in a way to its right and to my left, and off it went into the woods. And I was still trying to feel my legs, and it went right past Tom when he was in the location he was to be, and it went past him and went off into the.
Did you get a visual?
Thicket.
Did you get a visual, Tom?
Yeah, well, I got a visual of this dark, massive movement, just moving like light speed past me. It was just the speed is just incredible, like Peter's describing, and the stealth wasn't like loud like an elephant crashing through the brush. It was just so stealthy and light on its feet. And it moved so fast, this mass and that presence, yeah.
Peter and Tom, you both described to me a creature that's known to inhabit the environs around, I believe it's Edwards Air Force Base, and you measured the stride of this creature. Tell me about that creature.
Yeah. Well, Tom and I were all over the place, and, I went after every report, even every hint of a report that came across my desk in those days. And a group of Marines were coming out on a truck. They were coming out of the base. And the one we eventually called Big Ben creature, hair-covered, 2 legs, 2 arms, 2 head and a body. I almost said 2 heads. That would have added some interesting elements to this. Yeah. Anyway, this creature ran across the highway in front of the truck. The Marines swerved and missed it and rolled the truck. Well, that was one of several reports from that area. And so we went out there, and the stride, you could find the footprints were fairly plain to see. And at a run, the stride of this creature was 23 feet.
Mm-hmm. And the ground
simple arithmetic is all that's required to determine the rate of travel of this giant. And it was mind-boggling.
So 23 feet, let's do the math.
When it was there, it was gone, and probably within a matter of minutes, it was a long way away.
So if it's
which
traveling...
I think is part of the problem with trying to track these creatures.
Right.
Is that they move very quickly, and while a certain area might still be recovering from the experience, it's gone, long gone.
23 feet. If the stride is 23 feet, let's do the math. What speed are we talking about? 50 miles an hour?
We estimated what about 50 miles an hour, something like that?
Well, let's just put it this way. Now, keep in mind, Big Ben that particular sighting was in the late 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there have been a lot of sightings in that area since, but these are relatively unknown to the public. But I found that the experience happened more often than not. Even that there was a special task force, don't quote me, just let me blast it over the entire universe here. But there was a task force set up by the Air Force to find out what the heck was running around the base, right? And I talked to some of these guys. It wasn't easy. And keep in mind, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool citizen. I don't really want to mess around with the military, and I don't want to cause any flaps and whatever, which is one of the reasons I published everything I do. But anyway, these they were trying to find out what was going on there. And I talked to several of the personnel, and they were hush-hush, They were not supposed to talk about this. And I got a call, as a matter of fact, from a military personnel in 1974, I believe it was, who said, they can't talk to you anymore. I said, oh, really? Why not? And the basic message was, these guys are going to lose their pensions, kind of thing, among other things, if they keep talking to you about this. So I said, okay, I'm not trying to cause any problems. I would never do that. I understand. End of issue.
Well, Tom, you have obviously an understanding of the military mindset. Yes, it's a very conservative organization, but I don't understand. Let's say, for example, that that Sasquatch is another example of the lowland gorilla. That this is simply a creature that we haven't cataloged or documented yet. What's the harm in unless it's something even more extraordinary than that? What's the harm in the military allowing its people to say, "Hey, I saw a Bigfoot"?
Well, see, their mentality and understanding is when they see something, it's either known or not known. That's why it was titled UFO, Unidentified Flying Object. So if they can't label it positively, authentically, something,
and it's a problem of credibility.
Stay away from it.
They don't want to come off looking like a bunch of kooks or talking about creatures or flying saucers or anything else. I could tell you a lot of stories about that. It's going to be in my next book, as a matter of fact. But it's credibility. It's like everything else, I mean, I've talked to a lot of highly educated scientists, for example, who've had sightings and who've had experiences, and they don't want to talk about it. You know, there are things like tenure and respect of one's peers, and they can't prove it. This is one of the topics of my book, is basically we can't prove it. We can suggest it, we can report it, but we can't prove it. And so therein lies the so-called rub, you know, about all this. So I have set out to try to prove as much as I can, but it's difficult. And they were caught up in this, in the middle of it. And I think they were just afraid of the impression they were going to leave on the public, the flack they were going to get out of upper echelons. I looked into a report where a group of air patrolmen encountered one, and at base all they heard was the gunfire. Well, when they got to the location to investigate what had happened, the patrol truck was turned over. All the rifles had been broken in two. None of the personnel were injured, as far as I remember. I'm pretty sure not. But they were found in a kind of state of structured, inability to function. They just couldn't, I tried interviewing a couple of them myself, and what it boiled down to was, nobody's going to believe us, but this is what had happened. And in the report, tracks were found all around the area that comply with ordinary, if we can call it that, Bigfoot tracks. And nothing else was found. Now, what was interesting about that, I thought it was great. I managed to dig up a report that was really exciting. But after that point, I couldn't get anybody to back up any of it. And the group that was involved in the actual encounter had been shipped off to parts unknown.
Peter Guttilla is with us, the author of the Bigfoot Files.
Part of it is credibility. A lot of scientists have a problem with this, and so-called very educated academic types, because what are you going to show anybody? It's all a matter of belief. And even though the reports are exciting in some instances and pretty hard to refute.
Exactly, yeah.
They're just reluctant to say anything.
Let me remind listeners that Peter Guttilla, the author of the Bigfoot Files, is with us. Tom Muzila, veteran film and television actor and former Green Beret. Tom, let me ask you about one of your close encounters in the field with Peter. It seems to me when I visited you in your home, you were telling me about an incident. You were in your vehicle at the time. Yeah. Tell me about that.
Okay. Well, Peter and I, we had about three vehicles at Bluff Creek there. And not the original site where the Patterson film was, about 3 miles down at this Laird Meadows, I believe it was. And, it's a little campground, just very isolated area, way back in the deep woods. And I was sleeping in my Toyota Land Cruiser, had a bed and back. And, I don't know, I think it was like 3 in the morning, 2, 3 in the morning, I started having a dream. And, of course, Peter, I think, was next to us in another vehicle, and we had a tent there. And it had probably 5 or 6 people with us. And in my dream, I saw this huge creature walking through our campground on the perimeter of it.
Tom, let me just interject here, because we've got the music percolating up. Let's take a time out. When we come back, we'll find out more about your encounter with Sasquatch. Stay with us.
This is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. Follow Richard on Twitter at Richard Syrett. For show information, visit the website strangeplanet.ca.
Welcome back, Peter Guttilla, the Bigfoot Files, and Tom Muzila, a couple of veteran Bigfoot trackers. Now, Tom, you were regaling us your encounter. You're in your SUV, sort of on a stakeout out near Bluffs Creek, which is near the site of the original, of course, the famous Patterson film, which is sort of the Bigfoot equivalent of the Zapruder film. One of the most studied piece of film ever. It was purporting to be having a female Sasquatch caught on film. So you're on a stakeout overnight. You're having a dream that a Sasquatch is walking through your camp, and then what happens?
Yes, I'm sleeping in my Toyota Land Cruiser, and I have this dream with this creature in my dream walking through the camp. And then I even hear these footfalls in my dream. And it was so prominent and present, it woke me up. I said, wow, with this colors and vividness and almost like smells and everything, like it was real, and sounds. And also when I woke up, I still heard these footfalls about, 40, 50 feet in front of my Jeep. And I saw this huge black shadow presence walking stealthily right across the front of the Jeep. And I go, oh my God, I was just dreaming that. So I rolled down the window and opened the door slowly. I heard it kind of go through the brush. And like I said, it was probably just 40, 50 feet. And there's some moonlight, a little bit of moonlight, so I could definitely catch all the outline of the creature. I'd say at least 9 foot tall. And then after it went through the brush, I could hear step a little bit in the creek. And then I heard these weird gibberish sounds coming, something like blah, 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 blah. And it was almost like 3 distinct voices. And I tried to sneak over there, walk a little bit stealthily to listen closer. 3 distinct voices, almost like communicating with each other. And I sensed the presence of a big male, a female, and a sibling, like 3 of them. And there were 3 distinct, different kind of frequency voices to them. So I listened to it for a little bit, and all of a sudden, boop, took off, and we're gone. And then we smelled that strong sulfur smell that goes along with them, like rotten eggs.
Right.
Well, and then Peter and everybody woke up, and they caught it, and the presence as well.
Oh, I remember it well. I mean, I practically fell out of the truck. But yeah, it was you were genuinely impressed by it. I recall the incident, but there were so many of them with us there in that location. But I might point out that was also the place where the entire modern Bigfoot controversy began.
Right.
With a logger by name of Jerry Crew, who was the first to find footprints around his equipment. Because at that time, that campground wasn't a campground. It was an equipment yard for loggers and people putting in roads in that part of the forest. And there was a history there all along. And most of us who were involved in those early days were convinced that something had happened there originally. We've been debating Patterson's film for a long time, but we did have several experiences right at the Patterson location. So there's little doubt in our minds that there was something there. Whether or not Patterson actually filmed it or not remains moot, but there was something there in the early days. And I don't know, when was it, Tom? I think in the 80s was the last time we were there, the 90s.
Yeah.
And you could still feel the essence of things there. That's a very interesting place.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be ground zero, like a real hot spot. Now, Tom, did you not have the Patterson film subjected to some sort of analysis with some very interesting findings?
Yes, I mean, as you know, so many have, and Peter's seen it, and I had this good friend of mine, Bruce Bonney, and he was kind of a very scientific researcher analyzing it, and we found this, there was an institute down in Southern California, Orange County, called Coto de Caza, with this top biomechanics kinesiology scientist, Gideon Ariel, Israeli scientist, and a lot of the Olympic athletes would go there when they had some flaw, and it was all computerized. They'd hook up all these different wires on them. They'd transfer that over to a monitor, and these different sensors they'd run on, and they'd analyze it, where he's losing some momentum or energy or something, and they'd reprogram the athlete, and they'd go off and break a world record or whatever. So he was an expert at analyzing these films, and he ran it on this really high-definition type camera, slow-motion camera, projector, and it was interesting stuff I had never seen before, too, because that was pretty soft sand. And the gait that the creature had was very much more like a human gait. But when it stepped in the sand, it would have such power, it propelled itself out very plyometrically, explosively, where a human wouldn't have that kind of ratio power to step that way. So
Oh, I know. We've been there many times. I mean, one thing that we noticed, too, was that the sand is very talc-like in some of those places on that sandbar. And when we walked on it, we noticed, especially if we'd walked in the creek, the sand would adhere to the bottoms of our feet.
Okay, Peter, I got to take a time out, so just stay with us. We'll be back in a minute. Tom Muzila, Peter Guttilla, Bigfoot Trackers here on The Conspiracy Show.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
And we're continuing to delve into I don't want to call it the legend of Sasquatch, because I think there's just too much darn evidence that there's something stomping around out there in the woods, and it's real. Question is, what is it? Let me get Peter Guttilla, Tom Muzila back in here, two Bigfoot trackers. Peter, let's just cut to the quick here. What do you think this creature is?
Well, that's the $64 question. You know, I mean, I've been at it a long time, longer than I care to admit, and my conclusion is that they're real, they exist, they're there, they're not a threat in any way. Leave your guns at home, or take them out there if you're afraid of bears or something, but never use one on a Sasquatch. But they're there. We just don't know what they are.
Are we dealing with one type of creature, many types of
No,
creatures?
actually, we're dealing with a lot of them. I mean, they're all over the country, and they've been around a long time. The reports go back decades and longer. They leave behind evidence of their presence. They interact with the environment. They're harmless. I have one in the mountains behind my house, and I've tracked, and I've tried to track, but remember, no one has ever successfully tracked a Sasquatch to completion. No bones, no billets, boneyards, or graves of any kind have been found.
Tom, what do you think it is?
Like Peter, I mean, we try to keep our minds open. I mean, the sightings kind of occur in three different categories. I mean, one is like a physical beast, the presence of. One is still kind of physical, but very intuitive and very psychic. And then there's this third type, which Peter was the first one to bring this up years ago, closely associated to UFOs. And whether they have a similar-looking creature or they're using these creatures, it's, you know, we don't know. We're still trying to do that. But this third type has like three big toes and kind of like red glowing eyes on certain occasions, too. But the interesting part is the psychic and intuitive part, because they probably know, and like Peter's mentioning and hearing about weapons, it's interesting, most of the time, anybody carries weapons, there's no activity, nothing happens whatsoever. And it's almost like intuitively they pick up on that presence or that aggressiveness and just don't come around. So there's these two different legends that I mentioned before when we talked, you know, this old ancient Hopi Indian reservation, American Indian, and an old ancient Chinese legend. And these are myths, of course, but we don't know. What's similar on two different continents, they refer to these creatures that at one time were very abundant on the planet and maybe almost like defied God or got too powerful or something, and God reprimanded them and his folklore, and they're almost like sentinels of the planet. Now, whether that's physically or like apparitions or entity, I don't know. Peter and I were still trying to...
Yeah, we've been around in circles with this for a long time. You know, I'll tell you a little interesting story, and it's about the Shivapuri Baba. This was a mendicant and hermit that occupied this Shivapuri forest in India. I happen to know a couple of representatives of the United Nations who were gathered there for a kind of convention. And it just so happened that this little mendicant monk would stagger out of the woods and say something profound and then stagger back into the woods, right? And so they were all gathered, and there were some diplomats and others present. And the little guy shows up, perches himself on a small boulder, and begins to talk about the universe. That part I would have liked a lot, But anyway, what happened was right above his head on a ledge appears a Sasquatch, or a Bigfoot, whatever you choose to call it. And he looked around, he said, not to worry, not to worry. These are the protectors of the forest. And I thought that was extremely interesting. I'm not at liberty to mention names. If anyone wants to talk to me about these things privately, send me an email. But it so happened that it was really stunning to all these people. Yet it was there. It turned casually and walked off. And this guru, yogi, smiled, and not to worry. Now, we've heard this before from Native Americans. We've heard it from natives in Canada and natives in Mexico, that these creatures are the protectors, the guardians, if you will, of the wilderness. And none of them like the idea of us white eyes trying to capture them.
Well, Tom and Peter, both of you, I believe, have interviewed, I believe it was a Native American medicine woman, and did she not describe that her forefathers used to trade with Sasquatch?
Yes, she was like when I lived in Northern California by Lake Shasta, in Mount Shasta, she was considered the last of the Wintu Indians, but she was also a shaman. And she used to say, when by the campfire when she was a young girl, the elders would all talk about Sasquatch like it was just another tribe, the big hairy tribe, and they just took it for granted, and they get along like any other tribe. And they had certain trading, they trade tobacco, they trade certain things and food with the creatures, and, the creatures would leave them alone, and they'd almost kind of protect them in a way. And she even mentioned, I don't know how true this is, but she mentioned that she thought a couple geologists or something, or anthropologists came to camp once, and they brought a bone, a huge bone. Well, whether it was a Sasquatch or some giant or whatever, it was like a thigh bone, and there was a skull, I think, too, and asked them, have you seen anything like this before? So, and of course, they said no, and they talked about the Sasquatch, though. But, I don't know whatever happened to them or who they were or anything. She just mentioned it casually because it's probably early 1900s. Yeah.
Now, these stories are incredible, obviously, but it gets even more incredible. You almost want to not bring it up because it for some you might lose the room. However, we do have reports of Sasquatch in close proximity to UFOs. What are we to make of that?
Yeah, I'm your Huckleberry. I'm the guy who started most of that, and it started with a series of articles I wrote for Saga magazine in the early 70s. And at the time, I was an associate of Stanton T. Friedman, the physicist and ufologist, good friend of mine, going way back. And we, at the time, had founded the Ufo Research Institute, which was then in Lawndale, California. And Friedman was a scientist, and he had worked on all sorts of interesting projects, both for the government and not. And we started collecting reports from very reliable sources from all over the country. A lot of them were scientists themselves. He was, in fact, a good friend of J. Allen Hynek, who was the granddaddy of the UFO subject in the United States. And I was there with him. I edited the newsletter and talked to witnesses who would call the Institute and that sort of thing. And we started collecting a huge number of clippings, news clippings, and other reports from around the country. Well, I noticed something odd. I noticed that wherever there were low-level UFO reports, people started talking about seeing a giant, hair-covered, human-like being in the vicinity. And in many cases, footprints were found that looked very much like the standard Bigfoot footprints found in the usual Bigfoot locations, right? So I turned to Friedman and I said, this is strange. It seems there might be a connection between these two phenomena. So Stan looks at me and he says, don't bother me with another mystery. I got my hands full with one.
Actually, that's a pretty good impression of Stanton. That's exactly the way he sounds.
Yeah. So I just took it upon myself to continue gathering up this information. I wrote a few articles about it. I did a few lectures about it. I talked to ordinary folk and professionals alike about it. And, of course, there was no, it's one thing to prove the existence of one strange thing and try to bring them together and prove both is double jeopardy, But I never lost my interest in that, and it's true. They do seem to have some sort of proximal relationship. Now, what that is, again, is anybody's guess, and I defy any researcher or any expert to prove otherwise. We just don't know. But, the field is open. Be open-minded, as Tom suggests, and broaden your horizons. There are all sorts of possibilities with these things.
Now, Peter, this is a tough question, but does part of you, when you're looking at that connection, say, you know what, I'm just going to keep this one under my hat because I'm going to lose the room? I mean, it's hard enough to convince the majority of people that Sasquatch is out there, given the anecdotal evidence, and then you add this other layer, and people are saying all of a sudden, okay, now you've lost me.
Exactly. I've heard that all the time, and I'll tell you something, Richard. Frankly, I don't care. I've been at it a long time, more years than I care to admit, and and believe me or not, care or not, I couldn't care less. I'm not competing with these people. I've got proof of what I'm talking about. I just wrote a book about one of your fellow Canadians, Dorothy Wilkinson Izat. Now, she's got more accumulated photographic evidence to prove the presence of than any other person of record in the annals of the paranormal. So someday, if you'd like to talk about that, I'd be happy to. I wrote a book about it called Beings of Light, The Amazing True Story of Dorothy Wilkinson Izat.
We'll definitely do a show.
She's got more accumulated. She's got 35,000 feet of film. Live-action movie film, and you can't deny it. But I have people laughing in my face. I have people that I've shown my huge collection of evidence for Dorothy Izat. They look, they smile, and they disappear. They're not moved, they're not interested, blah, 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 blah. Same thing happens with Bigfoot. They don't care. They're not interested. It's not relevant. What the deuce does it matter to me,
Tom, when are you and Peter getting ready to hit the road again and on another expedition in search of Bigfoot?
We're working on that now, just trying to collaborate schedules and everything. But I want to bring up something else, Richard, to take it beyond what Peter's saying in a way. What's real interesting, Earth has certain electromagnetic lines, like ley lines, telluric lines, right? And as you know, a lot of the churches were built on these lines in England, and it enhances the electromagnetic field for meditation, for a sacred atmosphere, and even with the pyramids and Petra. If you go all around these different cultures, there's been studies of this. They've been built on these lines. And now, a lot of times where these telluric lead lines, magnetic lines intercross, it almost like warps time and space a little bit. And what's interesting, a lot of the UFO and Bigfoot.
Tom, let me interrupt you for a second.
No, I apologize, but I gotta interrupt you both because I'm out of time. I'm out of time, gentlemen. But listen, it just means we got to get together and do another show.
Okay.
Tom Muzila, Peter Guttilla, thank you so much. Peter's book is The Bigfoot Files.
Our pleasure for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good talking to you both. All right, back next week, we hope, with another great show. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. And what I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Good night.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at StrangePlanetPodcast.com.